Hi, welcome to this episode of Music with Tony Toppi. This is part 6 in the analysis series for VCE Music Performance. In this episode, we will talk about 3 elements: embellishment, ornamentation, and improvisation, which are usually grouped together in analysis discussions for VCE music. So let's get into it. First of all, this is a quick recap. You can look at my first 5 videos to revise the reasons why analysis is important in music studies. It helps us to unpack the music, shows us how it works, exposes the layers in the music. But the biggest thing is to help us to improve our own performance skills. How? Because we can investigate how others tell stories in their music, and then of course how they interpret the music, and therefore how we can interpret the music in our own performance style. We are always looking for an expressive outcome. So that is the overall effect that the music has on the listener. Everyone will have different opinions of the expressive outcome. That's fine and that's great because it induces a lot of discussion and good debate about music. If you can justify your expressive outcome, that's even better, which we have to do for the exam, and you justify it with concrete musical examples, meaning the things that we actually hear in the music. Other words for the expressive outcome may be general character, mood, or expression. So simply put, all analysis questions will ask you to identify certain musical elements and discuss how they affect the expressive outcome. So let's get straight into the topics of the day. The first one is embellishment. What is it? So embellishment is a variation on a theme or a melody. If we think of the word in English, to embellish is to add more detail or to make it more interesting. Same way in music. You'll have a simple melody, for example, stated plainly, and then perhaps further on in the piece it is embellished or varied and made more interesting. It's important to remember, for there to be an embellishment, there actually must be an original statement. If you think of like writing an essay in your English studies, you can't develop your ideas before actually introducing your ideas. Same thing with music. You have an idea, which is a melody or a chord progression or something, which is then developed through the piece, or in this case, embellished. So try to avoid saying the embellishment in bar 1. Probably not going to be an embellishment. It might actually be the statement of the main theme of the work. So here's a little example I came up with in a literary context of how embellishment might work. So the first part there, the dog plays in the park. That's our original theme, let's say. We're going to embellish that a bit further. The dog plays in the park on Sundays. We've got a bit more information and a bit more of a picture of the piece, or of the sentence here, of the story. Embellish a bit further again. The small brown dog plays in the park on Sundays. Now we have more information about the dog. Let's go again. The small brown dog plays in the big park on Sundays. So we have more embellishment there with the word big. And that's how music works, or how musical works operate with regards to embellishment. We have a theme, and then it's embellished, built upon to create further interest. So what do you want to do? You want to describe what happens to the melody, harmony, rhythm, articulation, dynamics, tone color, etc. Of course, not all of these elements will be present in a single embellishment. In fact, I would hope it wouldn't be, because it'd be way too much on the listener's ear to have a plain melody or plain theme stated and then embellished with all those elements. You definitely would hear each element creeping in. There might be a melodic embellishment or a rhythmic embellishment or an embellishment to the texture somehow. Differences that we hear, they're the ones you want to pick up on. And always, we want to ask ourselves, what is the expressive outcome? So, for this particular topic, we are going to turn to the genius that is Mozart. In his piano sonata in C minor, KV 457, the second movement, where I feel that the idea of embellishment is really obvious in a way and actually really easy to look at. So we'll look at the score. Once again, I don't normally like to do this for analysis, but I think it's quite handy to get an idea of how to identify these sort of things on the score and then to be able to find them orally as well. We're going to have a listen to this first and then we will discuss the elements of it. Okay, so having heard it, I wonder if there are anything you picked up on there as far as embellishments or what main melodies or tunes have been embellished. First of all, this is actually a 7-bar excerpt, which is a little bit strange for the classical era, where composers like to be quite structured and symmetrical. One would expect an 8-bar phrase or 8-bar statement. Mozart clearly hasn't done that here, but he was a bit of a composer who liked to play around with things, musical elements, and not do the norm, much to the dismay of his father, Leopold. Often in letters that he would write to his son Wolfgang and say, what are you doing here? Audiences aren't going to like this. You're not going to get listened to. Your music won't be played. You'll become a nobody. You won't make any money. To which, Wolfgang replied, I don't care. As long as it sounds good to me, I don't care what the people say. Anyway, I digress. But what we see here in front of us is a call and response or an opening theme or original melody with then some embellishments. Let's see what he's done here. So the first or the original theme I'm labeling as the first 3 bars. And we can sort of see starts here. We have some tonic harmony moving to some dominant harmony. Tonic, dominant, tonic, very popular in the classical era. And then it ends here on more or less a dominant harmony. So we have to assume that this is our main or original theme that Mozart is stating at the beginning that he will then embellish later on. So the next 4 bars are what I'm calling the embellishments. And what we can see is this. First of all, the harmony or the chords down below, we can see there's actually a direct, let's say, a classical version of copy and paste. They're the exact same chords. So tonic, 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 dominant, tonic, dominant, tonic. So that's more or less the same. Let's check the melody or the right-hand part here. So B flat here, B flat here. Then we have this little melodic embellishment here to get us back to this G note. And here's our G right here. Except here Mozart has altered the rhythm, so embellished the rhythm and given us more notes here. We have this little figure appears here, but then we have this lovely little symbol here, which I'll talk about a bit later on in the ornament section of this video. We look at this little section here, and it's replicated there, but it's introduced by this small little arpeggiated dominant 7 figure leading us into here. Here is the same as here. So far we've got a melodic embellishment, a rhythmic one, another melodic one, an ornament is shoved in there. Now this next bit here, so here we have 1 bar to finish the theme, but Mozart's actually added in an extra bar. So here's that funny thing that the asymmetrical, the non-symmetrical phrasing that we were talking about before. Structurally, it actually is very similar. You'll notice a descending line in the right hand, and we have little descending lines here. Not the same notes. It's in here in the embellishment, it's chromatic, so chromatic embellishment, whereas here it's diatonic, all part of the E flat major scale. But the idea is there, the little descending lines. We have a resolution here to the subdominant now, no longer the dominant chord. But then he tricks us and he brings us right back to this B flat, and we have what we call a cadential 6/4 and ending on the tonic. So a quick little summary there. We have some melodic embellishment. So here at the beginning here also. Some rhythmic embellishments here. The phrase length is longer, and the resolution is now on the tonic chord. So have a listen to it again with all that in mind and following the score, and see if you pick up on it. And as you're listening, I would like you please to think about what is the expressive outcome of these embellishments. Okay, let's move on. So another little embellishment that happens a bit further along in the piece. There's a bit of music in the middle, of course, as well, with other themes and whatnot, but I thought we'd stick to this original theme and how Mozart has varied this one or embellished this one throughout the work. So up there in the top left-hand corner, we have the original theme. I won't play it again. But then over here, we have another set of embellishments. So I'll explain it first, and then we'll listen. So first of all, here's our original. Once again, look at the left-hand bit here, the chords. Once again, here's that fun copy and paste situation. We have here, this time, very similar, except now we've got octaves. So we could call it a sort of a harmonic embellishment there, but they're essentially the same notes. We start on the B flat here, melodic embellishment, 2 Gs, that remains the same. Almost the same here, a slight rhythmic variation, and with a little turn. Here's our little melodic embellishment leading back into this section here, which is the same. And then that's the same there. Then with this descending diatonic scale, it's almost the same, except it's rhythmically displaced. So we have a rhythmic embellishment here. And then it ends in much the same way, leading back into what was in the previous example, the first embellishment. If we look now here at this embellishment here, it's almost identical as the first embellishment. So we have the same little melodic one there, rhythmic one, little turn added there, a slightly different melodic embellishment leading into the theme here. We have some interesting things here. Now, if you're familiar with historical performance practice, this does not necessarily mean loud, soft, loud, soft, loud, soft. In fact, this was Mozart's way, or not necessarily Mozart's way, but the classical period's way of showing accents. So where normally this note here, this A flat, would not be accented, Mozart has asked it for it to be accented, and he does that by using the forte symbol. Reason for that is certain symbols were yet to be invented at the time, but also had to do with the development of the piano in that era. In fact, it wasn't even a piano yet, it was called a forte piano, but you can do some research into that if you're interested. But for those of you who are studying Mozart or preparing Mozart in your recitals, just be wary of whenever you see things like forte or pianos that seem odd in a way, just have a think. It might actually have more articulation properties rather than dynamics. Once again, I digress into a different topic there, but useful information regardless. Here's our little embellishment of the diatonic scale where the chromaticism comes in, and once again cadential 6/4 to end on the tonic, and there's a slight melodic variation or embellishment there. So what do we have? We have embellishments here of this original theme, and it's the same amount of bars, so we can really make a connection between these two themes. And as we said, we have melodic and we have rhythmic variations or embellishments here. Not too much more. As I said, we could argue that this octave addition here is a harmonic embellishment, but we would be clutching at straws there, I think. And then we have what I'm calling the embellishments of the embellishments from the previous example. So what do we have? We have still the melodic embellishments that we saw, the rhythmic embellishments. There's some more melody ones there. And the articulations. So that's what I was talking about here, the articulation properties. Even here, forte on this chord, piano here, which is actually a stylistic way to play anyway, but for the whole tension and resolution thing. But once again, articulation properties rather than dynamics. And then, of course, the resolution. So let's have a listen to it again with all that in mind. And the excerpt will play from this new embellishment here. And always thinking about what is the expressive outcome. Okay, let's move on. Ornamentation. So what are ornaments? In everyday plain English, ornaments are objects that you may place on a table, for example, or on a Christmas tree, for example, for decoration, to make something look livelier, perhaps. In music, they are also decorations, and we decorate notes, or we decorate melodies or harmonies, for example. This is different to an embellishment because an ornament doesn't necessarily carry melodic importance. Of course, this depends on the style and the genre. The earlier in music we go, the function of ornaments generally was to prolong the sound of a note because the instruments of the time were unable to prolong notes. So ornamentation or ornaments were used to help carry the sound of a particular note or carry the sound of a particular instrument over that of the others. As we get later in music, say around the mid-classical era, definitely into the Romantic and up until the 20th and 21st century, ornamentation became an important part of music, and it carried more significance because instruments could sustain notes, could carry across the orchestra, etc., etc. So ornaments were able to be used in a more melodic or harmonic way. But suffice to say, in a very general way that ornaments are not necessarily the main focus of a piece of music, but they're to add decoration to certain notes or passages. As we said, they add color and they add variety. It's similar to that sentence that we saw at the beginning. The dog plays in the park. Every time we added a word, we added color and variety. Of course, we spoke about that in terms of embellishment, because we were embellishing the story. But I suppose there was that small thing I put there, the small brown dog. I could have left it at the small dog or the brown dog. So we can assume that the word small or the word brown was an ornament for one of the other words. A decoration, if you will. So what do you want to do? You want to actually identify the types of ornaments being used. We'll see them on the next slide. But that's what you want to try and do. And of course, when you do identify those ornaments and how they're being used, you want to talk about the expressive outcome. What is the purpose of that particular ornament being used in that particular place? So here are a whole bunch of different types of ornaments that you may come across in your own music. Some are more common to different instruments than others, but these are some fairly general ones that you might see in your music. If you are an instrument who uses a piano accompanist for your recitals, for example, you might see in the piano part this one here, the arpeggiata. But if you're a soloist with that reads off one single line, you may not necessarily see that in your part. So let's have a listen to an example of each of these ornaments. The trill. The turn. The lower turn. The upper mordant. The lower mordant. The acciaccatura. The appoggiatura. The arpeggiata. The glissando. A tremolo on one note. A tremolo on two notes. And now let's see an example of some of these ornaments, once again, in the Mozart sonata that we have been listening to today. So here's an image again of the opening 7 bars. And we won't play it again, but we'll see where we have these little ornaments. So we have here the turn, another turn, and another turn. Mozart was quite fond of his turns, especially in the second movement of his piano sonatas. They added quite a bit of an elegance to the music. And then we have, it's not exactly the appoggiatura mentioned on the previous slide, but it's a sort of type of appoggiatura that gives some sort of harmonic pull. In fact, the word appoggiatura comes from the Italian word appoggiare, which means to lean, like as in physically lean on something. So if we can think of this in terms of those, the first chord is leaning onto the second chord, for example. And as always, we want to link these ornaments to some sort of expressive outcome. And thirdly, we're going to talk about improvisation. Improvisation is the art of spontaneous composition, which is making music up on the spot. No preparation. Well, we assume no preparation, but there would be, if you're preparing a gig, for example, you would most likely prepare some ideas you might want to use in your improvisation, or you would practice chord changes, or you would practice certain melodic embellishments. But all in all, it's spontaneous, and what happens at the gig happens at the gig, would not necessarily be practiced, otherwise it wouldn't be an improvisation. So while this is different to embellishments and ornaments, a performer may use embellishments and ornaments to build an improvisation. So they might take fragments of bits of the music that you've already heard and play around and develop them through their improvised solo. People think that improvisation is something that pertains to jazz and rock music. Yes, it does. We hear it a lot, but it actually has been around for so much longer. I could go back and talk about Renaissance and medieval music and how that was a sense of improvisation also. But for the sake of our studies, we'll just look at the main Western era music periods. So we have Baroque improvisation. And this is just one example of, there are many others, but this is one. So we can see examples of that if you're a singer and you're singing a da capo aria. Usually on the repeat, on the da capo, you would add ornaments, and those ornaments usually are improvised. So that's the beginnings of a type of improvisation in the Baroque era. In the classical era, we have cadenzas in concerti. And what that was, usually in a first movement, towards the end of the first movement, sometimes also in the third, depending, the composer would literally tell the orchestra, well, not tell the orchestra, but would have the orchestra stop. The soloist would play an improvised solo based on the themes introduced in the music prior. And that was supposedly improvised on the spot. These days we have a lot of cadenzas that are written out and available in published editions that modern day performers learn and perform. But it would be much more stylistic for a performer to improvise or create their own cadenzas. In the Romantic era, we have vocal cadenzas, similar to those from the classical era, but in operas, where the singers would improvise some sort of run or some sort of melisma to intensify the emotion of the work. And then, of course, we come to jazz and rock improvisation, and we know them best as instrumental solos, like in the guitar solo or the sax solo or the trumpet solo, for example. So, as I said before, improvisations usually hint at the main melody or melodies, but then they introduce completely new material. So that's how you know if it's an improvisation or an embellishment. The presence of the new material is improvisation rather than embellishment, although the two are linked. It's the new material that tells us that this is more or less an improvisation rather than an embellishment. So you want to describe what you hear. So, and to do that, I would ask yourself, what part or parts of the main melody has the performer used or varied? How has the main melody been varied? What types of embellishments or ornaments have been used? And have idiomatic instrumental techniques been used? What do we mean by that? If you're a wind or a brass player, you might be able to bend notes using your tonguing or lipping, like lipping up or lipping down. If you're a trombonist, you can do those slide techniques. A pianist can gliss up and down the keyboard or play really fast chromatic notes, for example, or trumpets in their hugely high notes or really low notes, for example. So things that pertain to actual instruments, like on stringed instruments, the use of pizzicato, for example. And always referring to the expressive outcome. What does it tell us? What does it give us? And what does it make us feel? So, as a musical example, we're going to have a listen to the song The Girl from Ipanema, a lovely bossa nova piece. We're going to listen from the start and to hear the main sung melody, which in jazz terminology is what we call the head, the main melody, the full structure of the work. Then usually after that, the performers will improvise solos using that main melody or that main form. Listen to how Stan Getz, who's the saxophonist there pictured, how he uses fragments of the head to develop his solo. What does he change? How does he change it? Then listen to how Stan Getz interacts with Astrud Gilberto, who is the singer, after the sax solo. Once again, what are the expressive outcomes achieved? So we'll have a listen to it.
when she passes, each when she passes goes. When she walks, she's like a samba that swings so cool and sways so gently, that when she passes, each when she passes goes. He smiles, but she doesn't see. To the sea, she looks straight ahead, not at him. Long and tan and young and lovely, the girl from Ipanema goes walking, and when she passes, he smiles, but she doesn't see. She just doesn't see. No, she doesn't see. She just doesn't see.
What a great piece of music. So that brings us to the end of this episode. If you have any questions, queries or comments, please don't hesitate to contact me at tonytoppi@me.com, and don't forget to subscribe, like and share this video.